Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the 2016 Bridgewater's Finest Movie Awards. In the previous video, you just watched my awards for I Can't Believe I Loved This Movie, I Can't Believe I Hated This Movie, I Expected More from These Movies, and I Expected Less from These Movies. Now we're going to move on to what's probably the co-main event of the evening, and that is the top 5 worst movies of 2016. I've got to be upfront with you, I didn't see a lot of bad movies this year. Honestly, if I really had to break it down, as far as bad movies, I probably only saw 2. So number 5, number 4, and number 3 on this list, look, they weren't good movies, and they probably weren't even average movies. They were just the 3 movies that were slightly below average, but not terrible. At the same time, don't worry, there's still plenty of bad material in them and plenty to make fun of, so let's get started. Top 5 worst movies of 2016. My number 5 worst movie of 2016, it's a movie we talked about in the last video, it's The Forest. So again, Natalie Dormer, Taylor Kinney, Stephanie Voigt, directed by Jason Zada. You've got twin sisters, one is looking for the other in the Japanese suicide forest of Aokigahara, and there's all kinds of supernatural stuff that's going on. And again, like, this is just a movie I so desperately wanted to like this. There's everything in the, like, Japanese suicide forest. Why can't you just be good? All it takes for this concept to be good is to use your surroundings. Now look, I know you weren't filming in the Japanese suicide forest. That's not the point. But you can take whatever forest you choose. I can recreate the Japanese suicide forest in the tiny little woods that I have 5 minutes from my house in rural Nova Scotia. I can recreate that, especially if I have a budget. But you so consistently failed at recreating this thing that should get your movie over in and of itself. Just the forest itself, and get your heel over. It's professional wrestling 101. Get your heel over. The suicide forest is your heel. Get them over. The only reason that this wasn't lower on the list and it wasn't a candidate for, worst movie of the year, like number 1 or number 2, there's probably enough material in the movie for the average moviegoer to look at it and say, okay, I was kind of entertained. Even if it's just the jump scares, because look, the jump scares aren't bad. I just don't think the best horror movies that I've ever seen are reliant on jump scares. I think they're reliant on atmosphere and being creepy and a sense of dread and things like that. Those are the best horror movies that I've ever seen. I love me a good slasher flick, but I don't think jump scares should define your horror movie. But some people really like jump scares. And for those people, you're going to find enough material in this movie to be at a level of enjoyment with it. Sadly enough, I was not even close to getting there. At a rating of 35 out of 100, The Forest is my number 5 worst movie of 2016. My number 4 worst movie of 2016 is Ride Along 2. Ride Along 2 is an action comedy, or so it says, starring Ice Cube, Kevin Hart, Olivia Munn, and Ken Jeong, and is directed by Tim Story. As his wedding day approaches, Ben, played by Kevin Hart, travels to Miami with his soon-to-be brother-in-law by the name of James, that's played by Ice Cube, to bring down an Atlanta-based drug dealer. As Matt from Two Best Friends Play would say, this movie has, quote, a big problem. So here you have a comedy movie, an action comedy, Kevin Hart movie that kind of weirdly, in a half-assed way, tries to focus on dramatic character development rather than just, these are your characters and here's your comedy. And I really believe that the aim of the filmmakers over the 2 movies, the 2 ride-along movies, was to make the characters likable, relatable, interesting. They didn't do that. They didn't do that at all. These characters are not likable. They're really not relatable in any real tangible way, unless you happen to be a cop in Miami who's just married a coworker's sister and you two don't get along. I guess if you fall in that prism, if you're in that wide prism, not so much. If you're in that prism, then maybe these characters are relatable to you. Otherwise, they're probably not. And what's worse, you shouldn't try to make them relatable. That's not the point. The point is not to relate to the characters. The point is to find the characters funny. What the result is a lot of that character development is just bland and meaningless. You couple that fatal flaw with a pretty generic plot line as I'm going to go to this place to stop this drug dealer. How many times have we seen that in action movies, comedy movies, action comedy movies? We've seen that plot line 1,000,001 times. It's generic. It's not an interesting plot line. And jokes in a comedy movie, I mean, that's your bread and butter. A comedy movie, you want to laugh. The jokes are really all dependent on really annoying character traits, mostly from Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart is slowly developing into Will Ferrell. He's not there yet. He's not at that point. But he's slowly kind of getting there where he's like Will Ferrell. He's hit and miss. Some of his movies are really good and some of his movies just aren't. And he's slowly moving towards that. All of my humor is based on these one or two really annoying character traits. And speaking of, here comes Ken Jeong. Look, this movie isn't a disaster. There are laughs to be had in this movie, and most of them come from Ice Cube. Cube is hilarious in this movie. Unfortunately, Cube is supposed to be kind of the comedic straight man to Kevin Hart's wild and crazy guy. And if Cube is the funniest part of the movie, your comedy movie's probably failed. Unfortunately, this one pretty well did. At a rating of 30 out of 100, Right Along 2 is my number 4 worst movie of 2016. My number 3 worst movie of 2016, we talked about it in the last video, it's The Fifth Wave. Young adult action sci-fi, Chloe Grace Moretz, Ron Livingston, Liev Schreiber, Alex Rowe, directed by Jay Blakeson. Alien arrival, 4 waves of alien invasion. This is the 5th wave, and Cassie trying to protect her brother. You know the deal. What was really funny about this movie is when I left the theater, I knew I didn't like it, but my first thought was, that was too short. Like, this movie should have been about 20 minutes longer. And that's not because I wanted to see more. That was just based on the fact that there was so much in this movie that wasn't resolved or wasn't even really looked at more than just kind of little scratches on the surface. And it's like, the movie needed to be longer, but it needed to be a lot better too. Like I said, the things that happened needed more time, more things needed to be brought to a resolution or to an interesting continuation point, and most of them are just kind of brought up and just left. Also, there's a twist in this movie. What a twist, but it was not done by M. Night Shyamalan. There is a twist in the movie, and the twist is so paper thin. You can see it coming from probably about 20 minutes into the movie until the point that it happens. You're like, I know what's going to happen. And I know I'm a dedicated and very involved movie watcher. And I think it's almost human nature to try to get to the end of a movie before the movie gets there. But I actively fight against that. I don't want to spoil a movie for myself. So I might have a thought like, ooh, I wonder if this is what's going to happen. But then I'll just leave it. I'll just be like, oh, maybe this is going to happen. Boom. I want the movie to get there on its own. That's, to me, the definition of entertainment. It's got to get there on its own. And then you do a postmortem on it afterwards. But again, about 20 minutes in, I'm like, ooh, I think I know what's going to happen. And they kept foreshadowing it. For the record, good foreshadowing is done maybe once or twice before something happens. That's good foreshadowing. Not foreshadow. And that's what it did. It just kept smacking you in the lips with it until they finally make, oh, it's the big reveal. And everybody's like, we know. Spoilers, the good guys are the bad guys. The dynamic between Chloe Grace Moretz and Alex Rowe, Cassie and Evan in the movie, I dug their dynamic up to a certain point. And then at a certain point, it just kind of reveals itself to be the same thing as every other relationship in this movie, which is pair them off because they're teenagers. Again, really unfortunate. Supposedly this is a really well-written book by Rick Yancey. It's a popular trilogy. I suggest you go out and read the books, because I think the books are going to be way better than this movie and any movie that may somehow inexplicably get greenlit in the future. At a rating of 30 out of 100, The Fifth Wave is my number 3 worst movie of 2016. Now that we got that out of the way, time for the real shit. And I'm trying not to curse, but with these two movies, my number 2 worst movie of 2016 is They're Watching. They're Watching is an indie horror comedy, or so they say, starring Chris Lemche, Dmitry Dyachenko, and other people that appear to have never done film before, and is directed by the team of Jay Lender and Mika Wright, who were also the writers. Surprise, surprise. Now, I'm going to read to you the entire sort of snippet of what this movie is. Just a very brief synopsis. This is written by the filmmakers. You tell me in the comments section when you hear this, is this a movie you would want to watch? And we'll talk about it. When an American home improvement TV show visits a remote Eastern European village, the young crew thinks the lack of mocha lattes and free Wi-Fi will be the worst of their problems. But after their filming interrupts the superstitious villagers' private religious ritual, the situation takes a turn for the homicidal. And when the blood starts flowing, that's when things get really weird. Okay, so where do I even start with this goddamn train wreck? There's this thing that indie movies do, and by indie I mean independent, and not the Y indie, which is like big budget indie. No, these indie movies that have about a $50 budget. There's these things that these movies do, especially horror seems to do, which is they take at least one character, if not more than one, and make them absolute complete dickbags for no reason. Like, these are just characters that hate the world, they hate everybody around them, they're always just nothing but sarcastic and shitty to everybody that they run into. But there's no explanation why. There's no reason why they're that. They're just that. And I call that lazy writing. Movie's only about an hour and 25 minutes long. Takes about 40 minutes to get going. Good job, guys. But the biggest thing is, this movie tries to be a horror comedy, and it fails at the horror, and it fails at the comedy. The horror comedy is supposed to be tense, funny, and scary, and those elements are supposed to work together. This movie is not any of those things with any kind of frequency longer than about 2 minutes. Actually, quite frankly, it's more annoying than anything else. Speaking of 2 minutes, about 3/4 of the way into the movie, they try to give you 2 minutes of character development between the two main characters, and now they're having sex because they're both attractive. They're Watching is lazy, it's derivative of better movies, and the cinematic special effects towards the end of the movie, holy crap, I think I could have rendered something better in Microsoft Paint. Put bluntly, this movie blew big pointy rocks. At a rating of 10 out of 100, yes folks, that is a 1 out of 10, that is half a star out of 5, 10 out of 100, They're Watching is my number 2 worst movie of 2016. Number 2, there was one worse than that. And here it is. My number 1 worst movie of 2016 is The Brothers Grimsby. The Brothers Grimsby is an action comedy, or so it says, starring Sacha Baron Cohen, Ian McShane, Mark Strong, and Penelope Cruz, and is directed by Louis Leterrier. I think I'm mispronouncing that name. But after making a movie like this, I don't particularly care. After they were adopted by different families as children, Nobby, played by Sacha Baron Cohen, spent 28 years searching for his brother, played by Mark Strong. And upon hearing of his location, he sets off to reunite with him, unaware that not only is his brother an MI6 agent, but he's just uncovered a plot that puts the world in danger. But nothing put the world in danger more than the release of The Brothers Grimsby. Okay. So maybe you thought Ali G was funny in the mid to late 90s. Maybe you absolutely loved Borat. And maybe maybe you saw The Dictator and thought, well, you know what, this is pretty bad, but it's not terrible, and I laughed a little bit. Basically what I'm saying is, if you're a fan of Sacha Baron Cohen, you might want to stop listening to the show right now. Because Sacha Baron Cohen is a hack. I said this in my review, and I'm going to say it again because I think it's very apt and accurate. Sacha Baron Cohen, for those of you who prefer your Will Ferrell, a little more European. The only thing about this movie that is a saving grace is that you're not supposed to care about anything that's happening. But that's exactly my problem. There are other, better, more talented people that can make a movie with this kind of premise and have it be enjoyable, due in no small part to taking, I don't know, the 10 minutes that it takes to craft investment-worthy characters. Sacha Baron Cohen doesn't do that because he's a hack, and he's a spastic one at that. Sacha Baron Cohen would rather just dip his hand into this bucket of cum and butt jokes and just throw it, and then dip his hand into the other bucket of cum and butt jokes and throw that, and just do that like one of those automatic pitching machines at spring training for baseball teams, and just keep throwing basically jizz and butt jokes at you until all you can do is crack a smile, but it's not because it's funny. You crack a smile out of, I'm going to go with exhaustion, but more than likely that, probably pity. Sacha Baron Cohen is like that 15-year-old at an 18-year-old's party that's just so desperately trying to be funny, to fit in, and ultimately just looks like a jackass, and that's what Sacha Baron Cohen is. At a rating of 10 out of 100, yes, I did think this was worse than They're Watching. At a rating of 10 out of 100, The Brothers Grimsby is my number one worst movie of 2016. Oh boy. So that's it, folks. That's my top 5 worst movies of 2016. Again, I didn't really see a lot of bad movies this year. Like I said, even the first 3 on that list is like, yeah, they weren't great, but I mean, they could have been worse. They could have been number 2 and number 1. So there you go. I didn't really actively seek out bad movies like I've done in the past. But there's my top 5. We'll go over them here for you one more time. My number 5 worst movie of 2016 was The Forest. My number 4 worst movie of 2016 was Ride Along 2. My number 3 worst movie of 2016 was The Fifth Wave. My number 2 worst movie of 2016 was They're Watching. And my number 1 worst movie of 2016 was The Brothers Grimsby. Sorry. Okay, folks, time for another break in the 2016 Bridgewater's Finest Movie Awards. When we come back, it's the first part of the main event. And what that is the top 20 best movies of 2016. We're going to take number 20 to number 11 in the first video. The next video, the real main event, the top 10, number 10, all the way up to number 1. See you in a minute.